All right, you're welcome back. So we're talking about the different EIA processes and EIA being environmental impact assessment. So we said this is important for you to know how a particular project, either existing project or an intending project, which may be a building or any kind of setup, how it affects the surrounding, okay, being the environment, either the internal indoor environment or the outdoor environment. How this affects people and how this also affects the ecosystem at large. Okay, so this may be, it doesn't matter whether it's fewer people, larger people, animals, plants, but how it affects the environment and the components of that environment. So we gave an acronym for that. We said the steps for EIA as given by Prof. Bakburai, you can use SIMP DMR, that's SSIMP, then DMR. Okay, so think about the SIMP, think about that, and then think about DMR. SIMP, DM me right. Okay, blooper. Anyway, so let's get back. So the first S was for screening, and we said you want to find out whether this is even important or what is important about this project. So you screen, okay, just like you're looking for something. Okay, you're looking for overall indicators. Okay, and you're trying to find out how this is important, why this is important, and the direction this is going to go. The next is scoping. Okay, scoping involves looking into the project, looking at available alternatives, and I said you also draw a budget during the scoping because the scope is like when you say you're determining how wide a scope should be. What it means is you want to determine the constituents, okay, the components of your research, your assessment, etc. So by the time you have scoped, you have now identified, okay, these are the list of things I'm going to be doing while doing this project, okay? So you can give examples as for that, depending on what you want to do. So if it's a water project, for instance, what would the scoping entail? You may say, okay, pH, chemistry, etc. of the water, okay? You may want to do a biological analysis, etc., just to check. So it depends on the kind of project. If it's a building, you may want to check whether the building has integrity, the rods, the life of the building overall, and then the safety, the aeration, okay, the safety in design, the SID of that building. So just giving examples. So there's more that you can do, but you get the components of what you want to do and the alternatives, just in case a particular procedure is too costly or a particular procedure is not attainable. So you get alternatives all during the scoping part, okay? Then the I, we talked about the impact prediction. That means you are predicting, or rather you are looking into the possible impact, the possible effects that project can have, okay? And that may be good effects, positive effects, or negative effects, okay? So whenever you hear the word impact can be what? Positive or what? Or negative, okay? So it depends on how you want to look at it. So you look at the project, and that's what determines whether the project is worth doing or what? Or not worth doing. Okay, so you predict the impact of the project as you have seen, because don't forget, this is not just theory. Okay, so the environmental impact assessment is actually a practical plan. So as much as we are doing scoping, impact prediction, etc., we're also measuring certain things. Okay, we are not just predicting impact on paper. Okay, so this is not me saying look at the building and say what it will. No, you also measure certain things. Okay, so if there are diameters you have to measure, you measure them. If there are chemicals you have to test, you test them. Like I give examples with the water and the physical chemistry. So likewise, at the point where you're now predicting the impact, it is an informed prediction based on the markers that you have measured in the environment. So the indicators will give you the prediction. All right, so next one, moving forward, I said you talk about negative and positive impacts, right? Then the next one, you're talking about the M, which is the mitigation, okay, mitigation measurements and EIA report, okay, mitigation. Now, mitigation, you cannot mitigate something that's positive, right? Exactly. So we are now talking about the negative impact. So the negative impacts that you saw in the project, you are going to start looking at how you can mitigate them. All right. So let's say there was a water problem. All right. And this is not just about water problems. I mean, this can also be a land pollution problem, etc. All right. So the project that they want to start, you have seen that there will be a possibility of pollution problems. And this may be land pollution, air pollution, water pollution, etc. And one major thing that affects a lot of all three of these kind of environments as water, air, land is what? Something like petrochemical pollution, okay, which is typical to us in Delta State. I mean, this is Delta State University, so usually for questions and simulations, for those of you practicing your past questions, you will usually see a lot of questions about this. I think there's no escaping. You have to know about environmental pollution in Niger Delta, okay, which is typified by petroleum exploration, okay, so that's very important. So now, for a petroleum exploration project, maybe they give you a site, say maybe Bomadi, Burutu, Boni, wherever this is, okay, it's maybe riverine areas that have fuel reserves, or where petrol is being explored, okay. You must know that, first of all, if it's a riverine area, which kind of pollution will it have? Water, land, or which one is predominant? Water, because riverine, right? Then after that, but anything that flows in the water leaches into the what? Into the land. Okay, so there'll be water pollution, land pollution. And then, remember, by sunlight, you have evaporation. So at the end of the day, you must have some form of air pollution. Okay, so, and for them to even be releasing effluents into the water, there must be an engine, and every engine releases, most engines release some kind of gas. So there is no way you will not have all three forms of pollution in an environment where you have petrochemical pollution. Okay, so when you want to inform your mitigation measurements and EIA reports, you must be giving mitigation measurements or mitigation suggestions that can cover all three aspects. Are you hearing what I'm saying? Yeah, so this is not just theory. So I'm not just saying, right, mitigation measures refers to, no, they will give you an actual project. Okay, if they're giving a question on this, there will be an actual project. So don't just tell us what mitigation measures are generally. Tell us the ones that fits this project. And I gave an instance in saying if it's a petrochemical project, then you must have mitigation for both air, both land, and both water. So I was giving an example. When you have a pollutant that's polluting an environment, you have to look at, first, point of source of the pollution. Okay, where is it coming from? Is it the gas that you are flaring that is causing this thing? Like in the case of Port Harcourt, that you had gas flaring. Okay, and that's anything that flares, of course, will end up in the water. If it does not end up directly in the water, what will happen is that it will go into the cloud, right? It will ascend into the atmosphere, and acid rain will form, which will still fall back to the water. So eventually, whatever goes up comes what? Comes down. What goes around comes around. That's the cycle of the environment. Remember, water cycle. So somehow, anything that goes into an environment will touch all three parts: water, land, and air. No matter what it is, because there's air cycle, there's water cycle, so it must go around. Okay, so look at the point of source. So what can we do about gas flaring, for instance? Okay, we can repurpose, we can valorize. Okay, I'm talking about a recycling case. Okay, we can find a way to either recycle or repurpose. We can channel that gas. Okay, some of those gases are the flammable. These are mostly the flammable parts of the hydrocarbon chain, ethane, etc. Okay, so those gas can be also repurposed to cooking gas. Okay, all such gases that are being flamed. If they were not flammable, they will not be burning anyway. So they are being flared because they are highly flammable. And if they are highly flammable, they can be repurposed industrially and rechanneled into cooking gas and some other uses. So they can be harnessed, okay, intubated, and put into other forms of uses. They can also be used for boilers, right? Because boilers are important, like you have in breweries, etc., where they have to boil and do a lot of heat engineering. And they can also be used for heat generation, okay, for engines that need heat. So there are many uses that we can have. So repurposing of gases can also happen in the case of flaring of gas. Whatever will reduce the pollution. Is that clear? So I'm just giving you examples. So it depends on what they have given you. Let's say they give you a poultry project. You won't be talking about petroleum now, right? You'll be talking about how to mitigate smell. What else can poultry cause? Infections, right? Yes. There are some zoonotic diseases that spread from humans to man. Bird flu, etc. Okay? And there may also be rat problems, which go hand in hand with what? Exactly, okay? So there are problems, viruses, etc. So your problem will be zoonotic diseases, smells, and infections. Okay, that's what you'll be dealing with. So for your mitigation measures For those ones, you talk about maybe occasional disinfecting, as if they must do the project. Otherwise, you may discourage the project. If the negative parts of a project outweigh the positive parts of the project, at the end of the day, in this your environmental impact report, you may have to discourage the project. But you are giving the reasons. You're like a lawyer. Okay, so your team will have to give reasons why this is a negative project. So write the heading and explain. All right. So public hearing. Public hearing, like the words say, okay, non-technical summary of the general audience, for the general audience, implies category A and B, except the following: modernization, etc. All right, so simply put, sorry, I can't read everything here. Simply put, public hearing, you have to come out to the public in plain terms. Okay, so this is not just the technical report. The technical report is the one that all of you came together with. That's as a team of professionals. But for the public hearing, you're now talking about what you have to tell to the people who are direct beneficiaries of that project, or indirect, the public. Okay, so if that's a university project, the people who live around there, what's going to be the report to them? Decision making. This is done a registered body, depending on the project's category, under certain conditions. So decision making is not up to you as an individual anyway. It's up to the body that certifies. Okay, so depending on the project, a body will ratify it. All right. Number 7 is what? Monitoring and what? An implementation of the environmental management plan. That's the M in the DMR, right? Exactly. So we monitor and implement the environmental management plan. So any plan you came up with, whether it was a purification plan, a recycling plan, etc., you have to monitor and evaluate it. Okay, what is monitoring? Monitoring means you have to be checking whether it is the way that you planned it that is going. All right. So if you planned that a particular noise level should not exceed 85 decibels, you have to now have a noise meter to be measuring, or dosimeters, to be measuring whether the observable or environmental noise level is exceeding that. Okay, so you have to have reports, feedback, okay, whether what you're saying is within considerable limits, okay, so as not to put the health of the general public at risk. Implementation part is, of course, about rolling out the plans that you intended already. So you implement, you roll out the plans and make sure that the impacts are within considerable expectation. Otherwise, you may have to retweak some things. Next and the last is risk assessment. Okay, so what I have here in the note is that risks such as occupational hazards, life cycle of pollutants, technology assessments, and hazard analysis are taken into account. Okay, so you have to check, and there's actually a risk assessment. All right, that's a lecture, so we'd also deal with that. So you can explain from your knowledge of the concept of risk assessment, okay, hazard identification, etc. All right, explain them here because it's actually important that you assess risks. Now, one of the important things in AI is that you can draw this like a circle. It's continuous. Okay, so it's not a one-off. Does not mean when you've reached this part, once you've done it once, you're done. Okay, so as the owner of a project or part of a project, you may have to repeat at a particular range of time, okay, or seasonally, or as the need arises. Okay, so when explaining this, also explain the needs to repeat some of these procedures routinely, because there's room for routine monitoring and evaluation of your project. So I'll let you ask questions now if you have questions. Okay, so for those who are looking at this on probably video, you may have to write in comments, and then we'll look through it, and then I think we'll give the answers in comments or other videos very necessarily. So do we run through the next one? Analyze this. There may be different kinds of projects. So I give an example with poultry project. I give an example with a petrochemical project. What other project do you think? A building project, right? Even swimming pool project. Okay, they all have different kinds of risks. So if risk assessment is not different, scoping will be different. If scoping is not different, screening will be different. If screening is not different, so they are all not the same. So there's no one particular procedure. It's just that these are the steps for everything. Okay, so whenever not come out with the same outcomes, irrespective. All right, so let me look at the first question, right? I think I should. So there was one about oil-related area. A 400 level student went on an excursion to Burutu. They saw a vast area of soil and water contaminated by waste. They were correctly informed that the solution to the problem is the repair of a contaminated soil. All right, so this is not EIA, okay? They were correctly informed that the solution to the problem is the repair of the contaminated soil. That means somebody has done EIA already. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So when you say correctly informed, okay, this is science. Okay, so if you say somebody was correctly informed that this is the problem, how did you know the problem? It's called environmental impact what? Assessment. So somebody has assessed and given you the report. So you can't be saying the solution here is an EIA, okay, as it were, because this is assessment. So we are looking for a measure, what to do. And what do you think is the right thing to do? They said the solution to the problem is to repair contaminated soil. What process can we use for that? Remediation, okay, that's repair, to remediate. Okay, so your remedial process will be something like bioremediation, okay? Bioremediation, because we know that from the context of the question, all right? This is mostly riverine areas that have oil exploration, like I said in the beginning of the video, all right? So areas that have this kind of oil problems, riverine areas in Niger Delta mostly have this kind of susceptibilities. Okay, so if they tell you it's contaminated and you have to repair, very likely the major contaminant is crude oil. Is that clear? There are some other places where it's not crude oil. Okay, I think there are places in those days in Wales and some other places where it was algae bloom and other biological contaminants. Really, so there are water bodies that have other biological, algae now, this green, there are waters that you see, in fact, you're not seeing anything, you're seeing green. And all that green you're seeing is the bloom of algae. Okay, algae has now grown to cover, and that's a lot of, a lot of pollution because it affects the life in that place. It also affects how healthy such a water is anyway. So excess of anything in the ecosystem is actually a problem, in as much as algae can be eaten by fish and some other microorganisms, some other organisms rather, but that may be a problem at some level. So when you talk about remediation, please know that we are talking about how to repair, and one of the most sustainable, that's not the only solution, but the sustainable solution. Remember, in the context of SDGs, we are talking about things that are sustainable. Okay, the S there stands for sustainable. Sustainable means something that can be repeated without causing much damage. Okay, the problem with some other solutions is that if they are not sustainable, what we mean is you cannot keep doing them. Okay, because you'll be introducing harmful things to the environment in the process of doing them. All right, so things like bioremediation, the bio there stands for biological. So in other words, it's kind of natural because it supports life. Okay, so bioremediation. So you now use biological means. Okay, you can use microorganisms or you can use plants. Okay, mostly these two. Okay, in the case of plants is what? Phytoremediation. And then you can use other microorganisms, but if you're using something like fungi is what? Like microremediation. Okay, so there are different organisms you can use, that's the truth. But jointly we call every of these processes bioremediation. So when you're now explaining, it now depends on what you want to use. So when you go to your literature or when you're reading, you can now check for different kinds of organisms that are applicable, okay, that you can use. All right, now so you start out by explaining the possible contaminants, okay? So the first thing you do when you want to answer a question is lay down context. What did I say? Lay down context. Okay, so that whoever is marking you even understands the context in which you are thinking. But at least lay down context so that your answer follows. So you now start by saying, okay, regions like Burutu in Delta State, as given by the question, typically may experience some level of water contamination due to oil exploration that happens in such regions. Oil exploration makes such an environment or such water bodies susceptible to contamination by petroleum/crude oil. Crude oil contamination releases hydrocarbons, okay, of different forms to the environment. Hydrocarbons can lead to water pollution, land pollution, and air pollution. you now start air pollution by hydrocarbons. Okay? Because this question, first, for you to put context, you have to put the pollution context. Okay? Because don't forget, one of the steps in identifying how to bioremediate, for instance, you have to first of all look at the nature of the pollutant, okay, to find the right organism. And so give context to the kind of pollution. Then when you now go to the question, you now say, okay, when you want to have the main part of the answer, explain in detail the different types of this process that you know. So you now say, okay, types of bioremediation. Okay? So that's after you've introduced bioremediation. So you start from the pollution, you now enter bioremediation. You now enter types of bioremediation. Okay? Yes. So you must understand it is a pollutant that will cause the need for bioremediation. All right? So you talking about pollution is to give context. Then you now talk about bioremediation. Then you now go straight to the types of bioremediation. Okay? Then you now give 1, 2, and if you know any other one, you give them there. And then B part, what is the significance of the process to body functions? Importance. Now we are coming to physiology. So how is bioremediation significant for body functions? Body functions is summarized as what? One word. Physiology. So what is significant to physiology? And physiology is the study of body functions, and the centric word in physiology is homeostasis. Okay, that's the balance in body function. So what we are saying is, how is bioremediation healthy, okay, for ideal function of the human being? Okay, so that you understand in context. So now, bioremediation, does it harm people or does it improve people? Okay, how? Is reducing the harmful exposure. Okay, that was why laying context was very important. You will now go back to where you were laying context and remember that you talked about maybe something like air pollution. Okay, so how will bioremediation now be significant to body functioning? Air purification, what will air purification do for body functioning, for instance? If the air is cleaner, what does it do?
Okay, to make us to
that will do what now? Until you get to talking about the function, you've not answered the question.
okay.
That is preventing airborne disease. I've not answered the question. How does it help body function?
I'll say purifying the air from like toxic chemicals, for example, like carbon monoxide.
Okay, so you must hit the hammer at the end of the day. Okay, so raising the hammer is until the hammer is hit before the nail will enter inside. So now you can talk about the reduction in environmental pollution, which can lead to 1, okay, purification of air, which leads to better respiration. For example, carboxyhemoglobin, which is caused by carbon monoxide in the air, okay, replaces ideal oxygen, okay, in respiration. However, with processes like bioremediation, air is purified and normal oxygen hemoglobin bonding will lead to healthier blood outcome. Now go to another one again, which we can now talk about. Which other pollution did you mention? Water pollution. Okay, so somebody who is taking in hydrocarbons, he has risk of cancer now. Okay, so carcinogenic substances which may have been taken in hydrocarbons, okay, are being prevented, thereby leading to better GIT health, better gut health, and better overall immunity. All right, so you now go to digestive system, maybe, which is still in the concept of GIT. Okay, what about food? Do you know that plants can absorb heavy metals? Okay, that's why I said you can use something like water hyacinth to achieve some kind of remediation. So you now talk about, okay, how that nutrition, okay, can be healthier as a result by reducing the waste volume in plants, etc. Okay, so all these are significant to body functions actually when the environment is better. Now that brings me to, there's a question that Prof asked, I think in simulation, he was talking about diabetes, he said, right? Yeah. That diabetes and hypertension, right? And he talked about the role of the environment. And somebody came to ask me that question, how the environment contributes, or the significance, I've forgotten how it was framed, of the importance or the role of environment in diabetes. And I said it's a very simple question. The reason is that the environment is in direct and indirect contact with the human person. Okay? And remember, what is homeostasis for real? Homeostasis is the maintenance, right? Yes. Of constant body environment. Not just that maintenance, but amidst external or other disturbances. Okay? Which means that it's the maintenance of an equilibrium, despite the fact that there are changes in the outer environment. Okay? So diabetes mellitus, what are the etiologies? Okay? So this is mostly related to the insulin problem. All right? And don't forget, what are the risk factors for diabetes? Nutrition problems, right? What else? Aging.
Lack of exercise.
Stress. Lack of exercise. Okay? So once you identify those problems, I think you already have the answer. For instance, now we talked about crude oil. Okay? If crude oil is in the environment, has it affected nutrition?
Yes.
Whatever has affected nutrition has affected health outcome. Okay? Do you understand? One of the etiologies of almost every disease is stress. What did I say? Stress. And that is why most of the stresses that you find, most of the diabetes that you find, especially in local communities, in villages, and amongst poor people, is stress-induced diabetes. Okay? What it means is that stress is a risk factor for almost every disease. Okay? So diabetes, the risk of diabetes increases by stress. Why? Because of the release of free radicals now and the rest in the system, thereby leading to the susceptibility of diseases and underperformance. Next, endocrine disrupting compounds. Okay, we call them ED what? EDCs. Okay, and EDCs are also in hydrocarbons. So chemicals in the environment, some sprays. Remember when I talked about pollution? I talked about the fact that there are some sprays that contain endocrine disrupting compounds. Okay, some of all these things, the spray shuttles and the rest. Okay, so some pesticides contain endocrine disrupting compounds. And what does that mean? What does it sound like? Endocrine disrupting. They give disbalance to the hormones, and insulin is a what? It's a hormone. So anything that gives disbalance to the endocrine system will definitely cause problems with hormones. Okay, so endocrine disrupting compounds are the second way environment can affect diabetes. Okay, because anything that is susceptible to the person in the environment can lead to such problems. Then next is overall immunity. Okay, as immune system goes down, what happens to the disease burden? It goes up. Okay, and what do pollutants do? Pollutants overburden the immune system. So the presence of pollutants and pathogens, okay, puts the immune system under stress, thereby leading to the susceptibility to various non-communicable diseases like diabetes. Okay, then you talk about lack of exercise. Okay, the environment can cause lack of exercise. For instance, most of the lack of exercise related problems are mostly in the western climes. That's because it's mostly cold, sometimes it's snowing, etc. and all that. So people may not naturally want to exercise and things like that. So in such instances, I think you will find that people may not be exercising properly. Okay, lifestyle too, lifestyle modifications, bad diets, okay, high cholesterol diets can lead to problems. Remember that diabetes and hypertension are like twins, right? Yes. They are called comorbidities because one may lead to the other. Well, what about hypertension? What is hypertension? The sustained or elevated increase in blood pressure, okay, at a pathological level. All right, so that is usually chronic. Okay, it develops at a chronic level. So it starts from high blood pressure and then goes to be sustained as what? As hypertension. So hypertension is a chronic condition. Now, hypertension is as a result of the heart, right? Yes. It's a result of the heart, and it's a cardiovascular problem. What's the chief kind of cells that you find in the heart? Muscles. And they are called what kind of muscles? Cardiac muscles. Okay? The cardiac muscles. Now, because they are muscles, what do they do? Characteristics of muscles? you expand, they contract, etc. Anything that is going to cause muscular problems can cause cardiac problems. Okay, that is why the same stress too can cause hypertension. Okay, anything that causes a problem with as a result of stress, okay, can lead to cardiac problems, because this blood that is pumping, okay, because the blood pressure is the pressure of pump in it. Okay, so anything that stresses the system for a prolonged season can lead to hypertension. Blood problems too can lead to hypertension. Okay, for instance, diabetes-induced hypertension. Okay, so you can see hypertension as a result of that. And then poor diet, for instance, atherosclerosis, if you remember. And how does that come about? By fatty plaques. Okay, so yes, so when a person is eating wrongly, or bad cholesterol, excess cholesterol and fats, okay, you see deposition of fats in the linings of the arteries, okay, thereby increasing the pressure of blood, okay, because the narrower the arteries, the more pressure blood needs to travel, okay, so it causes problems for the heart. So poor diet is a lifestyle, lack of exercise, which are all affect the individual from the outside, okay, which are all external issues and problems. So these are the different ways, some of the different ways that the environment can play a role in diabetes and hypertension. I hope you got something.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So if anybody got a question, like I said, just put a comment there. All right, so permit me to look through those assignment questions. I think they're very important. Major technologies that can be used for recycling wastewater into drinking water on a large scale. Okay, so there are some detection has different levels. Okay, so there are levels that you use for the large scale. All right, for water purification to be particular. All right, so there's one that we have for ultrafiltration. Okay, you may have come across that. Okay, and I think there are two that use the principle of filtration. There's also the one that uses osmosis, okay, for the filtration technique. All right, so two major ones using osmosis, and then you have this advanced oxidation process, that's AOPs, okay, and then in some climes they use disinfecting methods like chlorination, okay, even though some places have had research problems against that, but some of the halogens like chlorine, okay, can be used for some level of purification. That's because chlorination can do what? Can rid of germs, right? Yes. Good. So those are some of the methods that you find. So you can also see massive recycling, wide-scale recycling of water. Okay, water recycling. And water recycling is mostly used sometimes in Western climes. You see this in Europe and many places where the water, even from sewage and sewer, okay, some of this water are channeled into recycling plants and then repurposed back or recycled back and purified through a multi-step stage. Okay, there are places where they the sediments, and then there are places where they have materials that coagulate, okay, coagulating materials that will cause the fields to just coagulate together. So they pass it through multiple stages. And I think we'll display an image while uploading the video so you can appreciate the different stages to this. Okay, so water recycling is a very good large-scale procedure apart from what you have in chlorination and this ultrafiltration techniques. Okay, so that can help you. All right, so let me go to the next one and just giving you a Giphy. Biological pollutants involve life-borne, or rather sourced from living materials. What are the biological pollutants that, when mismanaged, they can lead to diseases? Microorganisms, right? Exactly, microorganisms, bacteria, etc., fungi, okay? Yes, and then they can lead to diseases, all right? What problems can bacteria cause? We gave an example one time, though.
Cholera.
Exactly. Which other one again?
Tuberculosis.
Okay, tuberculosis. What else again? What about the most common one? Salmonella. Okay, that causes typhoid. All right, Salmonella, paratyphi. All right, yes, that causes a lot of problems with typhoid, etc. So it's a very simple question. in context. So go look at different life forms, whether they are bacteria, fungi, etc. Okay, that can cause diseases, and then how they can be managed, right? How they can be managed. If there are bacterial problems in the environment, how can they be managed? Bacteria in waste, how can it be managed? Disinfecting, okay? That's if you can find a way to disinfect the site. Also, proper disposal of the waste. Okay, when you mix waste together, that causes problems. Volarization. We valorize biodegradable waste. Okay, they should be valorized. Part of the ways to valorize them is sometimes they are industrially processed into something else. Some other times too, they are used in composting, etc. All right. Okay. Now, before I lay context to the other questions, there are still some other questions here. I had also a major question about in situ and ex situ. A lot of misunderstanding, especially for those who were reading out our materials. And they said, okay, so what we saw, in fact, some people said it was the opposite that they were saying and all. And I totally understand because I've been there, done that, looked through as well. And I would say that for the most part, now, in context, they are right. That's the truth. In the Nigerian context, it's different. What we have is different from the Western and global context. Yeah, so in situ, in the context of on a global scale in foreign lands would mean in the sites of pollution. Okay, that's what they are trying to say when they say in situ. So in the site of the pollution can still be outside for some people. Okay, so in that European context, when they say something is in situ, that means on site. In situ, on site. When it is ex situ, it means removing it from the site. That means from where you saw the pollutants. Okay, so that kind of concept may give you the opposite of what we had in the descriptions that I taught you. Okay, because ex situ means you have carried it to the lab now, you've carried it out. Then in situ means on the site where the thing was polluted. All right, so now what you do for those who are reading from Google, from other sources, from other researchers, especially from European researchers, please give context to your definition before you start writing. Okay, especially if they ask you on different types of bioremediation or to explain in situ and ex situ. Give context, conceptual definition first. All right, when you've done that, then write what you want to write. So if that is your context, if you say that ex situ means out of sight, based on whatever you have seen, explain it like that. So no problem, you're going to get your scores. All right, so that's because you have given context to your definition and you are right. Okay, now in the Nigerian context of applying bioremediation, we didn't use that. Okay, what I used when I gave you that simulation was ex situ would be outside of a simulated working environment, and then in situ is inside, like a simulated working, inside a laboratory, a simulated working environment. That's because of the context of working on such bioremediation. For instance, and I was asking a public question, do we have pollutants in Nigeria that can really be excavated from site? Okay, that we need bioremediation for. Okay, so you see that in applicability, in Europe, you can see that, oh, maybe they excavated the site and they carried it to somewhere else to work on it and to bring it back. But is it Burutu River or what are you going to actually excavate in Nigeria? So is ex situ practicable in Nigeria for the things that pollute the Nigerian soil? Can you really take a site, a land or a village out of sight and go and work on it and bring it back? Okay, so that's why we said the in situ that we gave in context was working inside the lab to maybe culture microorganisms, etc., and then introduce it ex situ, which is outside. So we use that situ, our site, which is what situ means. Our site was the site of work, not the site of the pollution. All right. So your situ, so describe what means site for you. Okay, when you want to explain your write-up. So if you follow by my concept, which is inside is the site of cultural microorganisms or growing this, and then outside the site, which is where you implement your work, because every of these pollutions, who wants to solve bioremediation problems inside a confinement anyway? So most people actually want to introduce it to the environment. So that's the context, okay? So you agree with my definition and then you start out defining it like that, then you write like that. So If you're using the online definitions or the European definitions, also use it like that and it will be correct. Okay, so please, we have no generic problem as to which one we are going to accept. It's just that whenever you're citing your example, make sure that you state whether it is the local context and which one it is and the external context before you give your examples. All right, thank you very much. Okay, so other questions here: greenhouse gas effects and the causes. Greenhouse gases. This question can also come out within SDGs. Okay, what are greenhouse gases? Greenhouse gas. When we say greenhouse gases, it's not like the normal greenhouse. Okay, greenhouse gases are different from greenhouse. Greenhouse refers to sometimes an environment that you have where you are planting some things and you're controlling the environment. Okay, you call those things greenhouses. But GHGs, which are greenhouse gases, they include one of the chiefest ones is water vapor. Okay, then you have things like SOx, sulfur oxide. Okay, nitrogen oxide. Okay, you also have yes, and then CH4. What's CH4? Methane, yes, methane gas. Okay, chlorofluorocarbons, etc. So these things are greenhouse gases. And why are they called greenhouse gases? Because of their effect on the what? On the ozone layer. Okay, they are able to deplete the ozone layer, and the ozone layer is a film of ozone gas, which is O3, right? Exactly, which is prevents the rays, the ultraviolet rays, okay, or reduces the impact of the ultraviolet rays from hitting the earth, okay, and the direct biosphere. So the more ozone layers are intact, the better it is for the volume of UV rays that will be getting down to the biosphere, which is where we live, the world as we know it on this plane. However, with the depletion of ozone layer, which is caused by ozone holes, okay, and this is also caused by these kind of greenhouse gases because they go and react and then deplete the layers of ozone, okay, and then causing what is called global warming, okay, and we see indicators of global warming by the rise in sea level. What else? The melting of ice, which also leads to the rise in sea level. Okay, the heating atmospheric rise in heat levels too. Okay, then tsunamis and floods in some regions, and then acid rain. Okay, heat waves, and then you have the reduction of the size of lakes. Okay, non-flowing reserve waters are going to. Why the flowing rivers are going to flood? Okay, the ones that don't flow, that's what a lake is. Okay, like what you have in Lake Chad. Okay, so the lakes are going to shrink, while the ones that are connected to the oceans, remember the oceans are connected, have ice too at Antarctic ends. So the Arctic, the icebergs in Antarctica are now melting because of that's what some science say, although there's a lot of back and forth with that in terms of research. However, that's wraps around a lot of different kinds of pollution, including chemical pollution too, is contributing to that, and the heat levels in the world. And also, chiefly, what's the chief cause of this? The burning of fuels. Okay, burning of fuels. So that's why we have gotten into sustainable technologies, right? So what are the solutions? Green technologies, sustainable technologies, solar, okay? And then what else do we have? Rechargeable electric vehicles, right? EVs like the ones that you have from Tesla and some other companies. All right, so sustainable and rechargeable technologies are being used now. Also have the use of wind energy, okay? Then hydropower, okay? Some are using blue energy from the water, okay? Hydropower, etc. Every other power that does not rely on the burning of petroleum, okay? Because burning of crude oil has led to the emissions of what? Of the release of gases that are from hydrocarbons. All right, so that's very important. Okay, so that's a perusal of some of the things that we gave you, and I'll still be taking questions. All right, so a question said discuss the concept of global warming and greenhouse gas effect. I think that's what we dealt with now, right? Good. Then write in details the systemic mechanism for heat regulation in the body. This is an adaptative question. What's the systemic mechanism for heat regulation in the body? What does system mean? How a group of organs function, right? Yeah. Exactly. So when you say systemic regulation of heat, okay, so there's heat regulation centers in the brain, right? Exactly. There's the frontal and hinge regions that regulate heat. So now, when a person is hot, so if temperature is hot or hotter on the external environment, will it lead to hydration or dehydration? Dehydration. Why?
Because
That's the natural thing that physics will do. Okay, so loss of water will start from the outside. Okay, and as it starts from the outside, there'll be more demand on the water inside. Okay, so a person will start sweating. All right, so the more a person gets hot, they start sweating, and as they are sweating, where is the sweat coming from? Extracellular fluid. Okay, which eventually would burden the plasma in blood. Plasma is the liquid part of blood, and the water that is in blood is where? Is in the plasma. Eventually, what happens to the water volume inside the body? Increase or reduce? So when it reduces, what is the hormone that is used to manage and conserve water? Antidiuretic hormone. Okay, so we're getting somewhere. So from environmental heat to loss of water. After loss of water, what else do we have? Antidiuretic hormone. Okay, because now you have to conserve the one that you have. Okay, yeah. So when you want to conserve the water that is there, you now talk about RAS, right? You now talk about ADH, which is at the posterior pituitary, right? It's one of the hormones of the posterior pituitary. Remember, it's ADH and oxytocin. Exactly. So ADH will now be stimulated, and then it now reduce or increase tubular reabsorption, right? Exactly. So when water goes to the kidney, rather than passing out through to the bladder, it will be reabsorbed in the kidney back into the system. Okay, and then the person will now reduce things like sweating, etc. So water will be reabsorbed. Okay, so instead of water to go out, it will be reabsorbed, thereby leading to, is it hemodilution or hemoconcentration? Hemoconcentration. Okay, that's why the urine of such people who are conserving water is usually highly concentrated. Meanwhile, if you were drinking more often, it will be diluted and whitish. Okay, but because this one is circulating back, it will be having more and more waste products. Okay, but instead of going out, it's coming back because your body knows that you're lacking water. Okay, what happens to the CVS, which supplies the muscles, is that there's vasodilation. Okay, so vasodilation also is an implication of this. It's a part of the systemic mechanism for regulation of heat. Okay, to reduce the friction of blood flow. Okay, meanwhile, if the person was cold, they will what? They will constrict. Okay, so vasodilation also happens here. And all right, so I'll leave this as it were. So you can talk about two major systems, really, which are the two major systems that regulate, and then the brain, which is what we'll talk about also while mentioning the heat centers and then the posterior pituitary. All right, are you there?
No.
Let's see. What is acclimatization? Okay, so that context is the familiarization, okay, and the factors in that environment, which include air, weather conditions, food. Okay, so that's what acclimatization is, and it varies from humans and animals. Okay, so but it's simply adaptation to a particular environment, the body's adaptation, which takes a reasonable period of time. Okay, so it varies from animals and humans. Okay, so is there any direct questions that you people have? So I see some repeated questions like EIA, afforestation and deforestation. You know what afforestation is, right?
Yes.
Planting of trees to increase the green presence or the plant presence in a place. And why are we doing that? Human beings breathe out what? So what the plants need for food? Exactly. So if they are taking in carbon dioxide, what are they releasing? Oxygen, which is what improves the environmental air that human beings breathe. So they increase aeration, okay, and they improve the clean air while they mop up the carbon dioxide waste. Okay, so plants are actually good. They also serve as windbreakers to prevent air disasters in places, etc. For those of you that did geography. Okay, so deforestation does the opposite. It makes the air less clean, thereby increasing the carbon dioxide presence in the place, and also it also reduces the aesthetic value of the place. The place is not beautiful. And then wind can also cause destruction where there are no windbreakers in such places. All right, amongst others, oxygen saturation, I talked about that. Then climate change and renewable energy, I talked about that before. SDGs. You know all the SDGs?
Yes.
All right, so that's a walkover. I'm going to display them on the screen on the slide so you can look through that. Okay, so when you write, there are different types of EIA, etc. So you look at that as given by Professor Ovapuraya. All right, man and his environment. There are different theories. You learned that, right? Good. So when you write, don't let your write-up be too limited. Don't always just attempt to go straight to the point. Okay, get used to introducing the concept. Balance the concept. Okay, maybe you've done that, then underline where you want to start going straight to the point. You can underline that and then go straight to the point. And then when you're hitting the point too, I said define, describe, characterize, exemplify. Okay, so don't just define EIA is this. Describe. For example, okay, you can use an example. That's why I say exemplify to also describe your point. Okay, then characterize. Does it have different types? If it has different types, they give you different types now. So give them. If you don't have a pattern, you will miss out a lot of things when answering a question. So have a pattern to which you're answering your question. Okay. So this is my pattern. Like I said, I lay background first to show that I understand the question, and also by that I will guide my thoughts. Because once you start firing, you will not know at what points you're firing out of what they asked you. Okay. So lay a background first, then go step by step. So you can go to the back of your sheet, put a synopsis for how you want to flow. Okay, if it's an AI question, how will I flow? Introduction, types, examples, then importance. Okay, then steps. Okay, some can do steps before importance. I prefer steps for importance. Okay, at the ending because so after that you now do maybe recommendations or anything, or you stop there. I don't know what else to. So yes, have your standard synopsis before you enter the exam hall. Any topic, have your synopsis. Okay, so synopsis will help you to score more than a normal person. You would be an A student if you answer questions with synopsis. All right. Any questions, Precious? And what Cherish? Yeah, to Rita. Okay. So the rest of the questions under there, I think we look at hazard and risks. Some people, I think that was 300 level. We talked about hazards and risks, and we said hazards are anything that's have the things that have the potential to cause harm, or injury. Okay, and that includes dirt, any kind of harm, really. And they may be chemical, biological, physical. Depends on their source and where they are affecting, and then, or how they are functioning rather. And then we also talked about risks being the chance high or low, or the probability that a hazard will cause harm, right? And we talked about the risk of burns, different kinds of risks, slips and falls, etc. that are associated. Then in context too, we can talk about safety in design and the need for safety. So different safety precautions. So if you are given a situation like maybe in a medical laboratory, I think there was a past question like that. What are the safety concerns that a student on IT in a lab would apply? He's talking about the use of PPEs, right? The use of safety regulation, all right? Apart from PPEs, there are overall safety gadgets, for instance, putting sharps into a sharp box, okay? Proper disposal of waste. For your dress, overall, which are part of your PPEs anyway, making sure your feet are covered, etc. And then having prophylaxis nearby, first aid nearby in case of any emergency. It save you as a person, from having accidents or injury of any kind. So environmental physiology is enjoyable when you are doing your reading. Okay, take the questions, follow what I have described, and actually write.